Hello, people of the interwebs. It's your favorite shop building Sarah here with another mechanical review. And today I have the all-new 2022 Honda Civic SI. Now I did get to drive this car when it first launched out in Los Angeles and did a review of that on my other channel. There is a link up above if you want to check it out. It's more of a driving impression as well as overall review of the car. Today we're going to go in depth on the mechanics of this 11th gen as well as cover the history of the Civic Si and how it got to here. So without further ado, let's get it up in the air and take a look underneath. First up, starting in the rear, notice it's got some weird curly cues after the muffler. Honda did this as a silencer to likely eliminate rasp from this 1.5 liter, but also it's supposed to increase 27% over the previous generation exhaust flow. I think the engineer just liked water parks that designed this. The 11th gen SI utilizes a multi-link rear suspension, all of which is constructed out of steel, and it has some parts taken from the Type R, which include the front and rear compliance bushings, which if you didn't know what those are actually bushings that do what they're told, as well as the upper and lower rear B arms. Those are arms that, never mind. Also, the 11th gen now has a fixed suspension. No longer does it have the adaptive suspension from the 10th gen, and the rear springs are 54% stiffer than the previous generation. The rear anti-sway bar right here is approximately 18 mil in diameter, and Honda wanted to be fancy and coat the bolts in the exact blazing orange pearl as the car. I may or may not have fabricated that part. They may or may not have fabricated that part. They did it back here on the rear knuckles as well, which are constructed out of aluminium. You can tell a lot of thought went into the design of this exhaust system. It is stainless steel and it gets wider underneath the subframe because they had to sandwich it a little bit, so that way it still has the same flow as up here by the resonator in the center of the piping, same diameter. Just in the off chance someone is watching this and they're wondering, well, what is the exhaust diameter of the factory piping? Because maybe you want to modify it, but you don't want to sound like a bag of raspy farts with straight pipe. It is approximately 2.37 inches outside diameter, which is 60 millimeters. So it's got 60 mil piping on the cat's back portion for you to determine exhaust flow for power adders. You want to put big turbo on it. Okay, you're welcome. And here is your complete underside shot of the 11th gen SI. Honda used a ton of plastic under here for aero. It's nice and slick, and I'm glad they used plastic and not that cardboard felt nonsense. It's really clean under here too. This is an interesting piece of hardware. It's like a little plastic nutter noodle. It's a nut, but it's got doodles on the side. I don't know why, but this is just really satisfying to look at. It's very clean and organized. Everything is done in matte black, little plastic clip right here that won't rust or corrode. That's cute. It's got this little winglet right here underneath the side skirt in front of the rear wheel. Up along the pinch weld, you can see there is some rubberized undercoating out here on the outside, and the side skirts have honeycomb behind them. I can't exactly show you myself because the entire underbelly of this thing is covered in plastic, especially underneath where the transmission is, which the only transmission available on the SI, thankfully, is a 6-speed manual transmission. You can see something through this little access hole. Part of the transmission, maybe, possibly. Well, let's just pretend you can see it. It's got a 4.35 final drive ratio on that 6-speed. And new for the 11th gen, they went to a single mass flywheel over the 10th gen, which had a dual mass, as well as it has the synchro rev match downshifting feature from the Civic Type R. And on top of that, it has a helical LSD, not the type that makes you see cows flying biplanes over fields, but the kind that makes you grip coming out of corners. Moving up front, look at these axles. That's interesting. That's pretty beefy right there where it goes into the knuckle. Knuckle is made out of steel, but it's got this big cup built into it. It feels really beefy, actually. The front spring rates on this 11th gen SI are an increase of 8% spring rate over the adaptive suspension on the 10th gen. And the front anti-sway bars are 27 millimeters in diameter, and apparently they only wanted to put matte finish on the last 2 inches of it. The rest of it is gloss. It's weird. It's an interesting looking cotter key right here on the lower ball joint on this lower control arm. Look at these. These are pointed as well, the hardware on the lower control arm. So that way if you get like a rat or something caught in here, it'll shred it and get rat blood all over the bottom of your car. Time for the braking test. See what these brakes can do at bringing 2,906 pounds to a stop. Ready? No one behind me. Ooh. That was very comforting and smooth. A lot of that had to do with the tires too. Good job on the tires and the brakes. Those are good brakes. They could be improved. I think that's the one area in this entire car that I would improve, is I'd put bigger brakes on it. Especially for autocrossing. I would definitely upgrade the pads and the fluid, and I think it would do great with just those alone for autocross. Braking was accomplished with a set of 12.3-inch front rotors. It's only a single pot caliper up here in the front. The wheels are an 18x8. It is a cast wheel though, it's not a forged wheel. It's good looking though. I like the matte black finish on it. Glad it doesn't have machined face on there. And the tires, it's actually a package. It's the HPT package, high performance tire. It's a Goodyear Eagle F1. It's a 235 40/18. I don't know why I give so much hate on the hairy cardboard panels on cars instead of plastic. I just don't feel like it's gonna age well. I could be wrong. Anyway, in the rear, the brakes are an 11.1-inch rotor, still a single pot caliper, a little bit smaller than up front, and the wheel and tire setup, square stance from the front. I already did this once, but in a car like this, you do it again. In the name of science, I am now going to give it the beans. Drive mode wise, down here next to the shifter, there is a switch that says drive mode. And you have individual, which you can configure settings on your own, sport, and normal. I like that it shows a little graphic on the center display also. That's kind of fun. If only it animated it like Acura does. Down over here next to the force field button, there is your traction control. And there's no launch control because you are the launch control, the way it should be. Ready? No wheel spin, there we go. It's quick, but it's linear. It feels naturally aspirated almost. That's good. That's good. I wish it had like another 2,000 RPM in the rev range, because it's just so smooth and the sound is intoxicating, even though it's like fake sound generation. This is fun. This is a fun car. Good popper. Where are you? There you are. Nice and light. Look at that. Super light hood. Grab it by the foam. Oh, that's so cute. How did I never notice that before? They're little fans. Under the hood of the 11th Gen SI is still the L15B7 VTEC from the previous generation SI. However, it did lose 5 horsepower over the 10th generation. And a lot of people were like, oh, we got less horsepower. But here's the thing. One, they're sandbagging. This thing clearly makes more than the 200 horsepower at 6,000 RPM and 192 pound-feet of torque from 1,800 to 5,000 RPM, which is a big change from the 10th generation, a lot more usable torque down low. But I did some digging around online and I found a write-up that someone dynoed one of these and it put down 222 wheel horsepower and 233 wheel torque. That's at the wheels. Way more than what this thing is rated at. It just looks like a big sea of plastic parts everywhere. But honestly, this 1.5 liter gives a ton of room inside this engine bay to work on. I mean, look at the size of the air box in the battery. That alone takes up like a third of this entire engine bay. The little 1.5 liter on its own isn't really that big of an engine. It is a dual overhead cam, plastic valve cover. Look at the back half though. There's tons of room back here to the plastic intake manifold. Lots of room. You can see the steering rack all the way down there. And over here on the side, if you look at the inside of the engine bay, the inner fender liner is a part of the structure here. So, I mean, you could remove that and gain access to work on the side of the engine over here by the motor mount if you had to. The fact that they can make this much power out of a 1.5 liter is impressive, because the very first generation of the Civic Si in 1986 was also 1.5 liters. It produced 91 horsepower, but still, it's come so far and they've kept true to that same 1.5 liter formula with a bunch of deviations throughout the past, which first, I think it's important to touch on the very first Civic ever, which debuted on 11 July of 1972 as a 73 model. Now, the very first Civic ever had an EB1 1.2 liter 4-cylinder 8-valve that produced a whopping 68 horsepower at 5,500 RPM and 74 pound-feet of torque at 4,000 RPM. And then not too long after that, they debuted the CVCC technology, which I always thought CVCC was Civic and they just left the vowels out, but that actually stood for compound vortex controlled combustion. It was a big deal then because those cars were capable of running on either leaded or unleaded fuel and didn't require a catalytic converter until the 1500cc engine came out in the second generation. Now, the second generation debuted in 79 as a 1980 model. It only ran until the 83 model year and is available with two different engines, a 1.3 or a 1.5 liter, 1300 or 1500 cc. It wasn't until 1984 that we got the third generation of the Civic here in North America. And I keep mentioning North America because if you haven't noticed, I'm a North American, so I'm leaving out other parts of the world. There was different variants of Civics elsewhere. I don't live elsewhere though, and I can only fit so much information on a piece of paper and try to memorize it in this brain. It's difficult, okay? I don't have a team of writers, I have a team of penguins. 1985 rolls around, we get the very first CRX SI, and the 86 model year following was the Civic Si, which was also a 1.5 liter, just like this 11th gen right here, although it made way less horsepower and only had 12 valves, a single overhead cam, and no turbo. 1988 rolls around and we get the fourth generation of the Civic, which was what my very first car was. It was a 1990 CRX SI. 1989 was the first year of the Civic Si, however, only came in a hatchback here in North America. The CRX was available from 88 all the way up to 91 in the Si trim. It was powered by a single overhead cam D-Series 1.6 liter non-VTEC, although the EF Si hatchback only weighed 2,286 pounds and had 108 horsepower. 108 horsepower in a car that weighs 2,200 pounds is still pretty peppy and made that car kind of a serious performance hatchback in the year 1989. In 1992, the EG hatchback Si came around. This was the new fifth generation of the Civic. Also, the EJ1 Coupe is worth mentioning. It wasn't an Si, it was available as high up as an EX trim level, but that was what the black Civics with a green neon underglow were based upon on the very first Fast and Furious movie. The EG hatch was powered for the first time with VTEC. It was a D16 Z6, which was a single overhead cam VTEC. Only had VTEC on the intake side and not the exhaust side. Obviously, elsewhere in the world, there was plenty of forbidden fruit, even all the way back in the EF and EE generations. EE generation had a dual overhead cam available, same with the EF gen, which also had VTEC available. We never got that in North America. But things were about to start to change when the EM1 debuted in 1999. This is the biggest cult following SI, I feel, in North America. It was only available in a coupe and actually only available in the 99 and 2000 model year, which they skipped out the first couple years of the EK model range. Things started to change though with the next generation, EP3 SI. I liked the styling of the EP3 SI, but that car seemed to piss off a lot of die-hard Civic enthusiasts because it was actually slower than the previous generation SI. And that's because there was a forbidden fruit engine available in North America, but not in the Civic. It was in the RSX Type S. The Civic EP3 SI got the K20A2, which only produced 160 horsepower. So a lot of people started swapping the RSX Type S engine over into the EP3 SIs, and I feel that there was a big general feeling of saltiness, especially with cars like the Focus SVT that was mopping the floor with the little EP3. Not that I'm biased or anything. 2006 started seeing some strange changes with the Civic Si because things started getting more and more bloated, especially with the 9th generation Si that came out in 2012. That had a 2.4 liter. That's a big engine for a Civic, and it started becoming too big, I feel, to even be considered a Civic. But Honda heard people's complaints, and when the 10th generation debuted in 2016 with the L15, a 1.5 liter like the original Civic Si, but this time with a turbo. I mean, most people had been slapping turbos on Hondas in the aftermarket world anyway, so Honda's like, okay, we'll do the same thing, and they did. Then again, there was some more purists that were upset because it was no longer a 9,000 RPM screaming naturally aspirated four-cylinder. But it made tons of torque down low, and I think that made up for those issues. And that carried on into what we have now, the 11th generation SI. Still a 1.5 liter turbo, but here's the thing, forget about this. What happens with the 12th generation? Where do we go from here? Because everything is going electrified. Is it going to be a mild hybrid SI, which I could see maybe people being okay with that? But if it goes full EV, does the Civic Si die? I think there's a solution though, because Jeep has already proven it's possible to mate a 6-speed manual transmission with an EV. They did it in the Jeep Magneto concept. And I know there's gonna be these EV purists like, you don't need a gearbox with an electric car, blah, blah, blah. The Si is an enthusiast vehicle. It needs a manual transmission. Who cares about efficiency in this thing? It's all about banging gears. So I could see maybe the potential of the Si carrying on EV, but with a manual transmission. What do you guys think will happen with the Civic Si? Let me know in the comment section below. Since I already gave this thing a complete review on my other channel, the only thing it was missing was the mechanic score. I already got a 1.7 out of 5 beans, 5 out of 5 cookies, and 4.2 out of 5 penguins. But as far as the wrenches go, how difficult this thing is to work on a 1 to 5 wrench scale, 5 being the easiest car in the world and 1 being an abysmal pile of shit. This is getting a rating of a solid 4 out of 5 wrenches. It's a Civic Si. I think just saying that alone is enough for you to understand that, I mean, this is most people's first tuner car. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this review, and I will see you soon with another. Bye.